Call the meeting to order. Thank you all and Mr. Morlock for joining us today. This is a Senate Governance and Finance Oversight hearing discussing California's tax checkoff program. This oversight hearing seeks to raise questions about and develop a framework to improve our current tax checkoff system that's been in place since 1982. This issue was brought to my attention, quite frankly, in the back of the Senate chambers when Don Thompson, an AP reporter, came up to me and told me about this. I certainly didn't know about it, and I told him that we will investigate it, and if appropriate, we will have a hearing. And this is promises made, promises kept, and we're investigating all the funds. What we have here, if you take a look over here, you'll see a list of the current tax checkoff funds. It may be hard to read for some people, maybe not for others, but we have a list, and then we have those that have expired so far. Now, what happens is most people know when you file your tax form every year, your 540 form, you will have on that form a document, and currently for the 2015 filers, there are 18 funds where taxpayers have the option, in addition to either paying their tax or getting their tax refund, of making an additional contribution to a cause or to a fund. They really fall into two categories. One are funds where the money is directly given to a not-for-profit, for example, or an organization where the money is directly forwarded. And that depends upon the language of the legislation. The California Firefighters Memorial Fund goes directly to the firefighters. The California Peace Officers Memorial Fund, similarly, the American Red Cross, California Seniors Habitat for Humanity. In other instances, there's a process, whether in some instances we'll hear today, grant processes and the like, where the taxpayers wish of those dollars to support those causes, whether it's Alzheimer's or University of California or California breast cancer, sometimes go through a competitive process, sometimes the money has fallen through the cracks. And the two issues are both does the money get there and how long does it take? What we've done right here behind us, behind Senator Morlock, is a chart where if someone, for example, on this chart wrote a check for $25 to the YMCA Youth and Government Program on, say, June 15, 2015, even with snail mail, assuming it took a few extra days rather than FedEx or UPS or something, the money would be available for the fund in the worst-case scenario probably on day 8. Here we have an example, and we actually have a real-life example I'll mention, where a taxpayer files their income tax return, checks off the box for $25 to the YMCA Youth and Government Program, and going through that process of when it's received, when the money's transferred, depending upon what fiscal year it's received in, when the Department of Education submitted its budget request proposal for legislative approval, and then there's a legislative approval, it's 807 days later. That is something that I don't think that folks really expect how long it takes. We have a similar example with respect to the Homeless Children's Fund, where it's taken as much as 3 years for the money to get to its intended purpose. So what we want to do here today in the most constructive way possible is to understand what happens. There's 51 of these tax checkoff systems that have been put in place since 1982 when the first one was instituted. Taxpayers of California have donated $102 million, between $4 and $5 million a year during that time frame. Staggeringly generous folks from California willing to support, in addition to paying their taxes, other important causes that they deem appropriate. And so in order to try to understand what happened, we want to look where there was mistakes and where we can get deliverables of how to fix it. Certainly, the question comes up, well, you got folks who are now at the end of the year, they're looking for deductions, they're going to make contributions. Does this have a chilling effect? Our hope is that it has exactly the opposite. These stories have been out there because of AP, and what we want to do is to inspire folks to have confidence that that their money is going to the right place, and it's getting there as quickly as possible. I just briefly want to thank a few folks. Miriam here, Boone Haziz is our consultant at the committee. She's been working diligently in putting all this together and talking to a lot of folks and the like. I also want to thank the California Endowment, Bob Ross and his entire team for allowing us to use this facility. It's very gracious and generous. Tim and Jeremiah, our sergeants who are here, always diligent in helping us. Dana and Veronica and Lisa for helping us put this thing out. So, and thank you for the skinny lens, Dana, because I appreciate that as people are watching this. If the 3 people that are probably watching it in my office in Sacramento, I need the skinny lens. Scott, also thank you for helping and being here, and of course, my boss of my office, my chief of staff, Diane Griffiths, who was my chief when I was speaker, who was chief of staff to the Board of Regents and the general counsel to the California State Assembly, among a number of other jobs, to make sure all this stuff goes off right and I don't mess it up. So with that, we've got 3 panels. The first panel will discuss the collection processes for tax checkoff systems as well as fund transfers and abolishment processes. The second panel will look at 2 very successful programs and tease out what attributes have led to their successes. And the third panel will explain how tax checkoff donations have sometimes fallen through the cracks and what can be done to prevent those losses of funds. And I just want to say, and I mentioned this to the press, that the Attorney General has a very diligent process for the not-for-profit world. When somebody writes that check to American Red Cross or to the American Cancer Association or whatever it might be, and there's a process in place, we need to make sure from a government perspective that we have similar types of diligent processes to make sure that we inspire confidence in taxpayers, that when they do decide to write a contribution, it gets there and it gets there quickly. A part of this committee is John Morlock, who served in Orange County as a supervisor and as the treasurer tax collector? Correct. Treasurer tax collector. He is an accountant by training, and I begged him to be here. It didn't be very hard because he really knows numbers. He's excellent on this, and he can help us understand, in addition to his Senate expertise as a senator, but his accounting expertise and understanding and love for numbers, to help us really dig into this, and hopefully, whether it's through legislation, some other changes of process, whatever the least resistant path is, to help us figure this out. So I really appreciate that you're here. Senator Morlock.
Thank you so much, Senator Hertzberg. I don't have a lot to say. I just have some curiosities. I'm not, I prepared tax returns for almost 2 decades, so it's nice to see a 540 again. It's been a while.
It's the only guy I know who says it's nice to see a 540.
Two, I've had 2 decades now dealing with the media, and I have never really seen the Associated Press do a heavy lifting, digging, investigative report. So this is sort of new to me. So you mentioned the reporter's name was?
Don Thompson.
Don Thompson.
He's one, and there was another reporter. He was assisting another reporter who actually wrote the story. Who was that, Ray?
Bennett Maribel.
And are either of them here?
Don is, they're probably both watching right now.
Okay.
Hey, Don.
So it's just sort of interesting. I was trying to, figure out what might be the genesis. Maybe a nonprofit kind of finally got a reporter to do some work. But Bob, you were interviewed. What actually transpired? What was the genesis, and how did this story come together?
Well, Don came up to me in the back of the chamber during one of our end of session deals and told me about this. And I said, I don't know the facts, but if this is accurate, this is bad news, and we got to do something about it. I mean, this is just basic 101 stuff. And so we got on it immediately. And I told him, look, if we, after doing the homework, find that there's a basis for it, let's do a hearing and let's investigate and figure out what to do. So they had done their homework. How they got their information, honestly, Senator, I don't know. I didn't ask. Okay. But I just responded in the sense that this is one of those kinds of issues that we have to get to the bottom of to give people confidence in government. This is our job, and we got to do the homework. So we're doing the homework.
Great. No, I appreciate your taking that kind of immediate response, because you and I have had this discussion before, and that is who runs Sacramento and what happens when a department fails. And I'd like to have some of those questions answered today. I'd also like to know, obviously if the AP article was correct, and then I'd like to be as bold to look at the whole process. In Orange County, we have a zoo at Irvine Regional Park, and no one was coming to the zoo. So I was like, well, why do I have to pay for a zoo when we're going through the Great Recession, and besides the bear died? So what's the big draw? So it was, you go to your parks director and say, you get people in this zoo or we shut the zoo. So I'm sort of the same mind. We get people to really figure out page 4 of the 540, and I'll do what I can with my CPA society to say, hey, how are you doing when you meet with your clients? Are you asking them about this page, or, you know, what can we do to promote this a little more? But if it's not being used effectively, then we want to have that big generic, that
Right.
big overall, the general discussion. And then the last is just, would like an explanation. This is the day of digitized accounting, everything. We have spreadsheets, we have electronic transfers. This is so simple that it's embarrassing that we have to have a hearing on a topic like this. It's almost, you know, it just doesn't compute, as my mother would say to me after some TV show that.
Well, I think what you're
So-
going to find is that with respect to, at least on the current text, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are just direct transfers. And those seem to be, we'll hear about that today, from what Miriam was able to uncover, seem to be working reasonably well in terms of the money coming in on a monthly basis and going directly to those funds. It is really, it's really understanding how the legislation was drafted, where it created competitive grant programs, where you have this challenge with respect to the fiscal year and when money gets transferred, when there's these budget request proposals, how that process works, and how this gets caught up in this whole thing. So we're going to have to streamline that
But when
whole
you go
process.
to the website
Yeah,
of the state, it will tell you how many people per zip code contributed to what fund and at what amount. We have incredible detail from which you can do whatever kind of mining that you want to do. But a cash transfer, being a former treasurer, that can't be any more complex than setting up the Excel spreadsheet. So I'm looking forward to
Perfect.
some good responses to those types of
well, let's
questions.
start out from the Franchise Tax Board. Gail Hall is Director of Legislative Service Bureau at the FTB, at the Franchise Tax Board, if you can take a place over here. And Evan Goldberg, our friend from the old days in the Assembly, and the Secretary of State's office and other places far and beyond, who is the Deputy Controller for Legislative Affairs, and certainly is someone who understands this process, from my experience, quite well. Why don't we start out with the Franchise Tax Board? Let's talk about your insights on this. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Gail Hall, the LEDS Director of the Franchise Tax Board. It's a pleasure to be here today. And today I'm just you've mentioned that the taxpayer on the Form 540 checks off an election to contribute a portion of their refund to one of these charitable organizations. And when you look at the Form 540, you'll see there's a 3-letter code by each name of the Volicon. And that is how we keep track of the money, how much is contributed for each fund. And then
And those are funds from bookkeeping purposes that are on your books, but the money goes into the general fund?
yes, the money goes into the personal income tax fund,
Okay.
is deposited in there. And that's where it's kept until it's transferred.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, each June, we will transfer the monies that are in the personal income tax fund to the respective voluntary contribution fund. Now, the FDB is reimbursed for costs, and so the net amount of the voluntary contribution fund money is transferred.
And what is that overhead load on that? What is that amount?
This year, it was $136,000 for all the Volicons.
And what percentage that is, what percentage is that of the overhead? And is that consistent with what administrative overhead is for similar accounting in the not-for-profit world?
I don't know if it's similar to other not-for-profits, but I know that we could charge up to 2% the second year and 3%, and it's not. We do not do that. Basically, what our accounting folks are telling us, we usually charge $6,000 for a Volicon, our costs, and it's based on us actually doing a costing. And instead of doing a costing every year, which costs money, we've kind of determined $6,000. I mean, there are some that cost a little more, like the parks, but that you have a pass that costs more, but generally it's $6,000. So the new funds have $6,000.
And who made the decision that it should be once a year? I mean, if somebody makes a contribution, on the 15th of June, or the 30th, 28th, or 29th of June, or whatever, and it goes to your next fiscal year, that person's money sits in your account for a whole year until it gets transferred. Is that correct?
That's correct. We cut off the collections in May.
Okay.
So, it's been, Evan and I were just talking about that. We don't know the history. It's been, 33 years. I don't know if it's because April 15th, is the tax deadline, and probably the majority of the collections are within that period. So I don't know the history. I can try to find some history on it.
Go ahead.
Now, the funds will stay on the return until they either sunset or they don't meet the minimum contribution. And by September 1st of each year, the Franchise Tax Board will notify each fund and let them know if they're going to meet their contribution. And as Senator Morlock said, we've got a website that has a list of each fund and the monthly amount of contributions they're receiving. So the fund administrator can actually go on our website and kind of monitor how many collections they've made. So that hopefully that's been helpful to them. And
you said there's a minimum number that has to come in for each fund?
yes, there's.
What is that?
It's generally 250,000. That's the second year. It's not the first year. It's the second year, and then that amount is has the CPI increase each year.
So if under your current rules, I'm just looking for holes in this process, one is the once-a-year deal. If $200,000 comes in from taxpayers to the Alzheimer's disease-related disorder fund in year 2, and it doesn't meet your number, what do you do with the $200,000?
It goes to the fund, to the voluntary contribution. It would go to Alzheimer's.
It would, but what you said if it meets a minimum, I'm sorry, I apologize.
It would no longer be listed on a return.
Oh, I see, it goes off the list, but at least the money
Yes.
that's been contributed goes to its intended purpose.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's the process, like you mentioned earlier. It's simple. I mean, there's some administrative issues that happen when taxpayers, sometimes they think they paid enough when they designate and they don't, and we have those issues. But it generally runs pretty well. It's been a lot of years we've been administering this.
You have questions?
Yeah, if you
Go ahead,
don't mind.
please.
Ms. Hall, just a couple of generic questions.
Yeah.
How many employees does the Franchise Tax Board have?
I think it's between 5,000 and 6,000.
And with the zip code breakdown, if I could stay on that subject,
Yeah.
because it's so much detail, are they just California zip codes, or do we have multi-state filers and we include those as well?
I don't know for sure. We could have non-residents that file and designate. I don't know that amount or that number that would do that, but
It was
it
pages
makes
of
sense.
zip codes, so I was just,
Yes,
I
yes.
didn't want to verify whether they were California or not, so I thought I'd quickly ask. So do you have a fiduciary legal requirement to move these funds promptly and quickly to the state controller's office?
The funds are deposited quickly by us into the personal income tax fund, and then each June before the budget is when the journal entry that we give the controller's office the list of the total amount collected for each fund, and that's the time when we're reimbursed the cost too. That all happens in June. If you look at AB 93 from last year, the budget bill, it actually would list our costs in that budget bill.
So then, isn't the state controller in charge of all the bank accounts for the state of California? So when you deposit something, the controller has the money. They don't have to wait for you to transfer it over. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
So it's just in a sub-account on the general ledger. So you've collected it, deposited it, you've done your job.
Now it's Evan's
End of,
money.
end of discussion.
Yes.
Good.
Right.
So then, of the 5,000 to 6,000 employees, where does the Director of Legislative Services Bureau, are you just a little division? You're not the controller, you're not the treasurer, excuse me, you're not the head of the Franchise Tax Board, you're not the assistant to the head, so where do you fall in the pecking order?
Me? Well, I don't know if you're getting at, you know, I was the lucky one to come down here and talk to you about it. I think it's lucky. It's I think I can get a tan here. It's raining in Sacramento, but it's our filing division. There's a few people in our filing division staff. Maybe there's really one or two that handle this, and then also our research and stats folks will help with the monies collected in those codes. They'll have reports. They do the reporting. So it's and then people take phone calls too. We get phone calls from the different funds, you know, asking, how much they haven't, how much money do we get in this month? They're very anxious about meeting that
But you're
minimum
just
contribution.
you're just a receivable. You collect.
You're the bank.
You collect. You make the deposits. You don't
Right.
make disbursements.
Right.
Correct.
So once you've collected it, you've done your job.
Correct.
Franchise tax board is not the problem.
Well, I hope not.
Okay. No, we want to get to so you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's the controller that had the money. So I'll pick on Mr. Goldberg next then after he makes.
You know, just so you know that the
Good.
former head of franchise, was it the franchise tax board? It was Goldberg, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I took his
Yes.
deposition for a week once. I did.
Yeah, I'd rather throw up than go through a deposition. So what how
Me
you
too.
remember that?
Yeah, well, it's 20 years ago. He's long retired, right? Yeah. So, okay. So in essence, is there anything in the process, just in terms of you collect the money, you put it into it literally is in your personal income tax money fund, where it goes in that account, whatever bank accounts the state has, and then that cash is just accounted for, and then it goes to Mr. Goldberg, and he now is on the hot seat. Okay, now the flow of funds go to you. Now what happens?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Evan Goldberg with State Controller Betty Yee. So as Gail mentioned, the money collected goes into one main fund, the Personal Income Tax Fund. In June is when FTB then transfers it to us, and it's parsed into each individual fund. So the dollars that are coded to the Alzheimer's Fund go into that fund. The dollars that are coded to the ALS Fund go into that separate account. After that,
Can I just interrupt you, because I want to get
Of
this,
course.
it's inconsistent with my understanding. My sense is that when you deposit, you code it, you wait till, what Evan just said, Mr. Goldberg just said, is that you code it in June. You have this fund, right? You only have this data, because you read these 540s. Betty E's, the controller, doesn't read the 540s. You read them and make the determination as to where they go, because I'm trying to get to the timing issue. Do you code them immediately, or do you only code them once a year?
We, in June, will send the controller a list of each fund and how much money they're due to be
So if
transferred
I-
from the personal income tax fund to their fund.
So if we wanted to write a piece of legislation or in some way change the process by giving a directive to the controller, it would actually have to be a directive. This is what we're getting to, I think what Senator Morlock was getting to, is to you, to make you say, for example, this with the computer technology, to do it every month, so we know what it is, and we can, because all of a sudden, if you're waiting once a year, that money's sitting in an account. When we're talking about this flow chart here, that delay of a year is caused because your office is waiting a year before you code it. Is that a fair statement?
We code it, we just don't tell the controller till budget time when the transfer is.
Would it be
But we-
expensive or difficult for you to tell the controller or give the access to the controller the data so that Controller Yee, Mr. Goldberg could have access to it and make determinations with it? Because
No, it would not. We
that's
do
not your
that.
process now.
That's not the process, and
Okay.
I'm not positive legislation would be necessary.
Okay.
But it should be doable. This is what you should be doing every day when you give the deposit information to the controller. You should be giving the full spreadsheet of all the accounts that are being hit.
Yes, and that spreadsheet's monthly posted on our website.
Well, see, this
By
is
fund.
2015.
But like,
That
that's,
should
like,
be
if
daily.
we're
It should
screaming
almost
at,
be hourly when you're doing cash flow management.
yeah, because if we were going to the controller's office, and say, where's this money? What you're saying is, well, controller's office doesn't get a report but once a year. So what we would have to do in the process, you're saying it's posted on your website, but it's not reported to the controller's office, unless the controller makes a determination to look at that. So one of the improvements in this process would be an immediate, is this a fair way to go? An immediate reporting from you as the collector to the controller as the agent for expenditures would be maybe a way to start to improve this process. Is that a fair statement? You think that would work? Yeah, okay, because you don't, if you're not being told,
Well, I was nodding my head, which is, it sounds rational, but I don't work
Yeah.
at FTB, so I don't know the
I got it.
mechanics involved of an
Right.
immediate, mechanics or cost of an immediate
yeah.
dollar comes in, transferred to this account.
We would send, instead of sending it one time, we would send it 12.
yeah, but don't you, just apologize for the interruption, but I think this is really important to try to get into the, how to fix this problem. Because the delay, 807 days to get the money, part of the delay is your office normally waits to get its report at the end of the year, then it goes through its process to get to the next thing. If you could, if you're recording these things electronically, correct?
Correct.
Right, so as long as there was an interface that the controller's office had, and it could be daily, it could be, as Senator Morlock said, like you have in a business, up, hourly cash flow reports, doesn't matter what it is. You usually get it in chunks, but the bottom line is they could find out a lot earlier. And so one of the improvements in the process, it seems, we have to look at what the costs are and drill deeper, but it seems one of the spots we've looked at is figuring out that reporting mechanism inexpensively to make sure that what you collect and code, because you code this as soon as you get it. Don't you code, when you see these documents, don't you code that immediately upon processing the return?
Correct.
Correct. So it's
Yeah.
done immediately in real time. We just need to get that to the controller's office. We have to follow up on that. We'll make a note of that, but I think that's point one. I'm sorry, Mr. Goldberg, for interrupting.
Quite all
you.
right, Mr. Chairman. So once the money is transferred, what the controller does is send a journal entry to the administering agency of each fund saying the money has been transferred and it is now available to you to spend consistent with the statutory authority that the legislature set up when establishing the fund itself.
Okay, but I apologize to break you
Quite
down
all
on
right.
this, but let's just, I want to try to get to results
Sure.
here, and help me on this, Mr. CPA, Mr. Expert. But you might not get a journal entry for a year. It's under this process, as currently the law exists. I can write a check, and there's two kinds of deals here. I could write a check for the YMCA Youth and Government Program, and it will take a year before that journal entry under the current structure comes to your office, before your office then takes and transmits that journal entry to the agency that you have this much money to start your process. Is that a fair statement? So if we correct this, you could more immediately get those journal entries to folks.
That's correct. If we are notified, if the controller is notified on a more frequent basis that additional money has been put into the account, the controller would then turn around and notify the administering agency of that account that the balance is now X. Now the balance is now X plus, or the balance is X minus, depending if spending has taken place.
And then just real quickly, I want to make sure that my assumption was correct with respect to my opening statement, that there's basically two types of funds that we have, checkoff funds. We have checkoff funds where it goes to an agency and there's a process whereby the government determines how to spend that money, and there's others like the Habitat for Humanity, where simply there's a dollar transfer to the not-for-profit. So in the not-for-profit thing, there's no interfacing, is there, between what government decides, or they just write the check to Habitat for Humanity?
I'm not aware of that case that you just laid out, because for example, according to our documents, the Habitat Humanity Fund is administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. So anything checked off on the fund for Habitat for Humanity would go into the main PIT fund at FTB. June 15th, it would deposit it into the Habitat for Humanity Fund, tell us. SCO would then inform Department of Housing and Community Development, you now have X dollars in this fund, and you can begin spending the money or administering the grants consistent with whatever the statutory restrictions are on that fund when it was set up by the legislature.
So then, using Habitat for Humanity, which was a former client of mine, what's your fiduciary responsibility? You have to go through all these steps when we know that it's their money, they're a 501c3. You have to decide, does it go to national, or does it go to a local chapter, or does it spread to all the chapters?
Well, for us, not passing the buck, but for us, the establishing statute just directs the controller to transfer the money to the Department of Housing, in this case, and Community Development. Whatever the statute says relative to who gets the money at the end of the line, Housing and Community Development has to determine that. So whether it is a direct transfer of funds, whether it is a grant process where it notifies each qualifying entity, receives grant applications, awards money, and at the end of the process, it directs the controller to cut the check, but I'll get to that eventually. But each process is a little bit different depending on the fund in question and how the statute was set up by the legislature.
So the articles mention that certain funds had money lingering and then it went into the general fund. Are you going to explain that, or can I ask you that?
You can, your choice, you can ask or I can get to it, but
I'm demanding you to tell me.
Can we, Senator, can we just get to it? Let's just walk through the chronology here, because that's ultimately.
I'm very short, Senator, and so
So
no pun intended.
you look to the, so this idea of the journal entry, I just want to understand the time, okay? Let's just walk through it. So you get this report under the current processes from the FTB at the end of the year, the end of your fiscal. That tells you that there's X number of dollars, like we see in that the chart behind Gail, that how much money's on account. You then transmit that to the agency, and you look to the instruction on the statute as to what happens. Often, right?
Well, let me just say, we transmit the information.
You transmit the information.
Not the dollars.
Not
we
the
transfer
dollars.
the information to the administering agency that this money is available to you, and then you can go and solicit grants or spend the money depending on how your statute directs you to do it.
And there's no responsibility in the law in your office to follow up. You just, you're basically a reporting function.
That's correct.
Just a reporting function.
That's correct.
I've reported that this account now has this much money to this agency, and the agency that you transmit that data to depends upon what the statute tells you to do. And then you do nothing. So if that agency never does anything, there's no checks and balances in the controller's office. Next year you get up and you see, you don't touch it for a year unless they write you back and say, okay, we have a process and we want you to transfer X number of dollars for these purposes. You're silent on that. There's no further role.
With one exception in that every month we send a report to each agency reminding them of the fund balance. And I believe it's one report with all fund balances that are sent to all of the administering agencies, so they can each see they can see each other's fund
But
balances.
Beyond
But
giving
beyond
them a
that,
report,
nothing. Your statement
here's
is
your
correct.
number. There's no statutory responsibility by the controller. I'm not saying there should be. I'm just trying to ask that
Correct.
to proactively engage in the question of like, hey, what's going on? You got all this money here. This is supposed to be moving faster.
That's, your assumption is correct, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Well, then, just on that, do you pay interest on the money then? Is that, you're also giving an update of the account? So I know we're in a interest zero environment right now, but would those funds be accruing interest while they sit there?
Yes, they do accrue interest.
Thank you.
So once a department wants to spend the money, it essentially generates a claim schedule and sends that claim schedule to the controller, and the controller issues a payment to the payee. So the administering agency doesn't write its own warrants or checks. It directs the controller to do so. And this is, before I get to Senator Morlock's question, access to the money, it depends a little bit on the fund. And I don't know which funds fall into which bailiwick, but in some cases, the authorizing statute gives the administering agency something similar to continuous appropriation authority. Once they know the money's there, they award a grant, they direct the controller to write the check goes out. In some cases, the authority comes each year in the Budget Act. In some cases, there may be a BCP, though the controller isn't really privy to the BCP process. That's between the administering agency, finance, and then if approved by finance, it winds up in the state budget. But the easiest,
And
I don't know how many funds fall into
BCP
that.
for purposes of people that
Budget
aren't.
change proposal, my apologies.
I know what it is, but I just.
I know
wanna
you,
make sure-
I know, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. That's okay. That is fine. Go ahead.
And then circling back to Senator Morlock's question, if the fund in question goes untouched for 4 consecutive years, then the Department of Finance directs the controller, this is the general government code, unless there's an exception in a particular fund. I don't think there are many, if any. But generally, there's a government code section that says if the money is untouched for 4 years, the Department of Finance shall notify the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and Department of Finance shall direct the controller to A, transfer the funds back to the general fund, and B, abolish the existence of the fund itself.
So, at the county level, being the county treasurer for 12 years for Orange County, we call that escheatment. And someone leaves money with the county, and the department cannot find that person. State has the same, state controller is the same thing. All these funds that belong to people, but they haven't claimed them. So, but it's the department head's responsibility to find those people first. And then when they have exhausted all remedies, they then give the money to the treasurer. And then I had to buy a major ad and notify everyone in Orange County, here's your name and here's the amount, you've got so many days. And it was so interesting that reporters always showed up and said, hey, your name may be on this list. And then after that was completed, then we could move the money over into the general fund. And I think, Mr. Chair, there's something in the process that
Right.
we need to
Fix.
look at as well, because it looks like the controller didn't do their homework. They didn't contact the party that should have received the money before you transferred it into the
Well, they have no
general fund.
statutory obligation to do so, it's abundantly clear. But if you look behind you,
But appearance is everything, that's what
I got it, that's what we're fixing.
Yeah.
But if you look behind you, you'll see 13 funds that are expired tax, based on what you just said, Mr. Goldberg. There's the chart right behind you, and do we have one in your, do we give one to you?
Yes.
There's 13 of these funds that had money in the bank that had, under this government code, that reverted, it's cheated basically to the general fund because no one spent the money. And then here's 17 of them that look like they were handled properly. It says expired tax checkoffs with zero balance, so there's no money left. Just like you were suggesting, Gail, at the FTB, the notion is that that they expired because they had no money, and we decided not to continue to use them anymore. If they went below 250,000 in year two, as adjusted by inflation, as you correctly noted, then they went away, which they should, makes sense. So for those 17, it worked. For these 13, we have Lou Gehrig's disease fund at $66,000. I'm sure somebody in Lou Gehrig's Disease Association would have wanted that money. We have, the Arts Council, it's only $2,000, but things like the California Military Family Relief Fund, $1,174,000. The State Children's Trust for the Prevention of Child Abuse, $3,066,000. Those are significant dollars. Now, I know there's some issues about that. They haven't all reverted.
This is just their current balance.
Oh, these are the current balances.
Of 20,
Oh, these are the current balances. But the bottom line is that there's no, outside of the agency, the way we're talking about this, money comes in from the collector, gets to you, reporting delayed, can be fixed pretty simply, comes to you, you then report it. But what Senator Morlock was talking about in the process, it seems that what we're missing here is some accountability thing that makes sure that this moves quickly and the money gets out as quickly as possible, it seems. I'm just trying to analyze the process.
Correct. I mean, I believe your statement is correct. I guess the question, or one of the questions, is which agency should have the responsibility to go out to the nonprofit or the private sector to say this money is available? I mean, I don't believe it's laid out in statute, but in statute, the directive to the controller is to transfer the money or to notify the administering agency that the funds are available. The presumption, or my presumption, I should say, not having read each of the statutory authorizations, is that that administering agency knows the constituencies for those funds.
Yeah.
But right or wrong, an administering agency may not be able to drive demand to ensure each dollar is spent. And again, I'm sure the circumstances vary by fund and by interest level, because when something is set up in year one, that's not to say that the interest level in acquiring and spending the money is going to carry through for 9 years. I mean, 5 on the form and then 4 years of inactivity, because the money doesn't revert until there's 4 consecutive years of inactivity. It's not when they go off the fund, it's when there's 4 consecutive years of inactivity. So you could go off the fund in 2015, but be active awarding a grant every single year, and the money would never revert. The money would just run out of the fund, sorry.
Please.
He's kidding me.
Huh?
He hit me.
I was in
He's
a
a good
radio, I
man.
talk with my
He's a
hands,
good
Mr.
man, that's
Chairman.
all. Okay. Any other thoughts on this process? What would you do, Mr. Goldberg? You're a very brilliant guy, and you have a lot of experiences, and we've experienced in the process. What would you do, and maybe you're outside the realm, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to Controller Yee about this, but do you have any recommendations, as you obviously knew you were coming down here, you knew what this is about, you know, what would you do?
Well, I don't have any recommendations per se. I mean, I believe on the front end, I believe, and I think the controller believes, process can always be improved. And just because something was set up in 1982 doesn't mean it has to stay that way, and it doesn't mean it has to change just because. But is there a way to change the process based on what we know now? The answer to that is probably yes. The question is, what's it gonna cost, if anything? On the back end, the controller doesn't work, and I don't work in an area where it's a grant award situation. So I don't want to speak for the Department of Housing and Community Development or anybody else, because I don't know their process by which they go and solicit interest in the funds. I imagine some funds that have a great deal of public interest or great lobbying effort to get them on the tax checkoff or tax form in the first place have less trouble getting that money out the door, creating a demand for that money, which probably helps get it out the door, than a fund where there may not be as much public interest or a large constituency in terms of lobbying it for it to get on or stay on.
Let me ask this question, Mr. Goldberg. You know, I'm just thinking out loud about what you could do here to make this thing work that wouldn't be too expensive or take too much time, but maybe require in 500 words or less, we live in a Twitter world, as long as it's still in business, where in 500 words or less, each one of the agencies would have to publish at the year end on their website how much money is in the account and why it's still there. In other words, if you're a department head somewhere and you had to write that down, that I've got X number of, I got this California Military Family Relief Fund, right? And I got $1,174,000 sitting in that fund. Why is it there? And put it on the website. It wouldn't be expensive. You wouldn't make them write some big, gigantic report where they got to hire a bunch of people. 500 words, keep it super small. It's pretty simple to break it down. It takes a little time sometimes to write shorter sentences. But the point is to say, look, well, the reason it's here is because we got 7 grants pending and they're going to get out next year, and here's the reason. You can do it in simple terms and make them publish it on their website. What will happen will be, I think, the point you raised, outside of just general press attention or gadflies or whatever, the people that will be interested are the folks that will get the benefit of the Military Relief Fund. I suspect the Alzheimer's people won't focus on it, or the YMCA won't focus on it, but the military people will, and make them publish something like that every year so that if they're in the process, it's reasonable. Okay, sometimes it takes longer. So if we could get the funds transferred on a real-time basis to change it so money gets out the door quickly, and then create the public incentive where the people from the military world will look it up, like, it's $1 million and I got a family problem and I'm entitled to that money and they haven't done it, what's going on? You can then ask questions. It's not expensive, but might in fact get it. Any thoughts on that, sir?
I think any way that brings public attention to money that may be available is probably a good thing. I believe your suggestion is certainly a reasonable one. Then again, I'm not an agency that would probably have to be putting together such a statement, but I believe the concept of how can we easily let constituencies know that grant funding may be available is in general a good thing.
Okay. Anything else, Mr.
Morlock. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Evan, I'm glad you pulled the short straw, to come here. This year, my first opportunity to serve as a state senator, a lot of fun. There were 3 bills that we had that added new checkoffs. So we sort of really have a propensity to approve feel-good stuff. How do you vote against Preventional Animal Homelessness and Cruelty Fund? I mean, no one voted against that one. State Children's Trust Fund, we had 1 no vote, and the Sea Otter Fund, only 2 no votes. So these things are like no-brainers, right? And you can tell your constituents how great you are. So, Ms. Hall, you're running out of room on page 4 of your 540.
Yes.
So, and they keep coming. Are you going to change the font? Are you
So
going to
we're-
add another page? What do we do?
Well, we really would not like to add another page to the 540, which is only 5 pages. So what we've done is we formed a team, and this team is looking at possibly taking this list of voluntary contribution funds and putting them on a schedule. But we are reaching out to the stakeholders, the fund managers. We're getting, including the outside stakeholders on this to see what they feel about doing that. So, almost 90% of returns are electronically filed now. So you don't see this form.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that a schedule wouldn't disadvantage the number of people that would contribute. It would, they'd be on their software and they'd see it. So we're looking at that, and if that happens, that would be wonderful. We could remove it from a page and put it as a schedule. So I don't think electronically it would really make any difference, but we still want to reach out to the stakeholders and get their opinions and their ideas on that.
And then,
Thank you. Please.
Oh, sorry. I guess back to you, Mr. Goldberg. This issue, we have a legislative analyst office that kind of finds things out, and then we have a state auditor that finds these kinds of things out. But this was done by reporters, which is kind of unique. Doesn't the state controller also do audits?
Yes, the state controller has an auditing division that does mandated audits of some state governmental entities, some local government entities, the RDAs,
And
former
if there's a
RDAs,
subject of the
successor
day,
issues.
you go after the city
Yes.
of Bell or whatever, maybe,
Yes.
the soup du jour. I'm just curious, has the controller ever audited itself? Does it audit these types of matters? Is this within the annual requirement or biannual requirement?
It's not within an annual requirement, but it is certainly, in terms of auditing, actually, let me back up. We do have an internal auditor that audits our processes of the narrow view of, did the controller inform agency X that this money is available for it to spend, and did the controller process the claim schedule submitted by the agency to spend some of that money appropriately and consistent with the statute? So yes, we do have an internal auditing function that looks at that. Has the controller audited state agency administration of tax checkoff funds? Not that I'm aware of. Could it? Yes, it could.
Well, in doing just a little bit of research, it looks like Senator Wolk has been trying to fix this
Yeah.
in prior years. Isn't that like an alarm bell that, hey, we got to check this out? If constituents are coming to a senator to try and fix things, how did your department react to her bills?
That was before my time, but I can certainly find out. But I believe Senator Wolk, I thought her approach was more to
Centralized.
Centralized. I apologize. I'm mixing
Governor
it up.
didn't like
Okay.
it. And he, didn't want more government.
Okay.
But it should have sent a signal that something needed to be fixed. When you see something like this internally, who do you turn to improve the process? Or do we wait for a reporter to figure it out, and then it becomes this embarrassing?
I think
process?
ideally you turn to other people who have a hand in the process, be they the legislature, the controller, franchise tax board. Is there a better way to administer it? But in the end, I still believe that which entity should have the responsibility for getting the money out the door to the nonprofit. And I don't know the answer to that question. Is it better left with the agency as it is in statute, with the agency that works in that area of law or policy, or should it be centralized with somebody with the state controller's office taking applications for the Alzheimer's Fund or the Habitat for Humanity Fund or what have you?
Well, the state controller is not even afraid to go after the State Board of Equalization, which she sat on, right? So wouldn't it be great if she did a press release that said, of these following funds, the following departments haven't done anything with the money yet? That would be a great press release, and it would be no longer on your table, it'd be on theirs. then we would be asking them questions and not you and Gail, right?
I will certainly run it up the flagpole, as they say, but always happy to answer a question.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you, Mr.
Gail Hall, Evan Goldberg, thank you. Thanks for helping us. It's really instructive, and please send my best to your great boss.
I will, Mr. Chairman.
She's
Thank
the
you.
greatest.
Thank you,
Okay,
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
so much. Second panel, this is best practices, University of California, Marion H.E. Kavanaugh Lynch, doctor, director of the UC Breast Cancer Checkoff Program, and Heidi Jalon, the executive director of the Firefighters Memorial Fund. Why don't we start off with the University of California? Show us how to do it. Give us suggestions, of thoughts that you might have of what we can do. I mean, I really like, the only problem, just real quickly about the press release where, you asked the controller to do this. The truth of the matter is sometimes there's money left in these funds, but they're in the middle of a process. I mean, Marion spent months now working on this, talking to every one of these funds, talking to people, and there are reasons why this stuff, and maybe it's about to go out, or there's certain things that transpired, and so to stick your finger in folks' eyes who are honestly working is not always good. But then if you give them a window on their website to explain it and require them to explain it, maybe every 3 months, whatever, you then hold them accountable, but they have the opportunity to either A, be embarrassed, or B, explain a legitimate reason. You know what I mean? I'm thinking maybe that might be a way, because the only people outside of the gotcha game, what we don't want to do in all of this stuff, just real quickly, is just beat up government to beat up government. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to make it work for folks. So when we say we're going to do something like we're going to hear today, we do it. And so this is a way where the people that are really interested in the funds will watch it, just like the people, as Ms. Hall was saying, pick up the phone and call and say, what's the balances, right? Because they're concerned about whether their processes are working. So, I'm sorry. Please, doctor.
Good morning. I'm Mel Kavanaugh Lynch, and I'm the director of the California Breast Cancer Research Program. I want to thank Senator Hertzberg and Senator Morlock for inviting me to testify about our administration of the California Breast Cancer Research Fund, which is one of the tax checkoff funds. I want to start by giving you some context and telling you about the California Breast Cancer Research Program. We were created by the California legislature in 1993 by the passage of the 1993 Breast Cancer Act. The program was created because breast cancer activists around the state were impatient with the progress against, the slow progress against the disease. And together with scientists, clinicians, state legislators, and UC officials, they wrote legislation that created a program to make sure that the state of California is doing something about breast cancer. The California Breast Cancer Act increased the tobacco tax by 2 cents per pack, and 45% of that revenue funds the California Breast Cancer Research Program. So funding, then that is our primary source of funding. So in the copy of my testimony that you have, there's a graph of our revenue through the years, and you can see that most of it is from the tobacco tax, which is a steadily declining source of revenue due to the good news of decreasing consumption of tobacco in the state. Yes.
Great.
This funding is supplemented with the taxpayer donations from the Tax Checkoff Fund, as well as by individual contributions, so people who write us checks, and grants that we go out and pursue from other agencies. The University of California was asked to administer this program, both through its capacity as the official research arm of the state, and because of their successful administration of some other statewide health research programs. Our staff managed the solicitation, review, award, and oversight of research grants, and then the dissemination of the research results. By being housed in the Office of the President Research Grants Program Office, we're able to share grant making and financial management resources and personnel with other UC administered research programs. This allows us to leverage our administrative support in the form of financial, grant management, and legal services. It's part of the reason that we're able to keep our overhead so low. It also provides a unit in UC, which is expert in the state-of-the-art policies and procedures for research grant solicitation, review, and grant administration. So the breast cancer research program has really one goal, which is to eliminate breast cancer by funding innovative and creative research on breast cancer throughout the state of California. Now, you've referred to it as the UC Breast Cancer Research Program, and that is where we are housed, but we fund research all across the state to UC, not UC, anybody who can do good research in breast cancer.
UC is just the agency, like Mr. Goldberg was talking about, that administers it, but yeah, it's called the California Breast Cancer Research Fund.
Right.
But you're just the agency designated to do,
Yes.
in management, I see.
So in order to reach our goal of funding the best research, we work with a diverse and very committed advisory council to determine the areas of research that we're going to support. We then ask for applications from researchers around the state and have those applications reviewed by scientists from outside of the state to reduce our conflict of interest issues. There are also breast cancer advocates, patient survivors on all of our review panels. We are only able to fund a small portion of the grant applications that are submitted to us. So we fund 5 to 10% of the applications that come in every year. So for this reason, the tax checkoff funds are actually greatly needed and put to excellent use. These extra funds allow us to fund research that would otherwise remain only an idea in a scientist's head. And by supplementing our program funds with the tax checkoff funds, this allows us to turn those excellent ideas into actual reality. Since 1994, the Breast Cancer Research Program has made California a leader among states for breast cancer research. When we bring these reviewers from around the country in to review for us, they say, oh, I wish my state had a program like this. There is nothing like this elsewhere in the U.S. The program is the largest, most stable state-funded breast cancer research effort in the nation. We have to date awarded over 1,000 grants to 108 different institutions across the state, totaling more than $260 million for research in California to prevent, treat, and cure breast cancer.
And how much of that 260, do you know, was tobacco tax versus checkoff, do you know?
So I know that about 10 million was tax checkoff. Most of the 260 of the remaining 250 is tobacco tax, but we have also received grants from community foundations, from NIH, from other sources that have given us money that we've then distributed in grants.
Is this the program, 1983, is this was Barbara Friedman started
Yes,
when Diane was working for her? My chief of staff?
yes.
Yeah. Okay, she's still working on it 30 years later. Go ahead, it's good.
So now the tax checkoff fund. So this was actually created in 1992. The breast cancer tax checkoff fund was created in 92, which, if you're paying careful attention, was before the California Breast Cancer Research Program
Yeah,
existed.
1 year.
So the first 5 years of the program, the money went to the Department of Health, Department of Public Health.
I see.
After 3 or 4 years, the advocates expressed some dismay because the money had not been spent. At the same time, here we came along and now we existed, and the State Department of Health and we mutually agreed it makes sense for the money to go to us. They did not have the infrastructure to solicit, review, and fund grants. And it actually takes a fair amount of infrastructure and money to do that. And to do it for $300,000 didn't make sense. To do it when you're adding $300,000 to $15 million made a lot of sense. It was D.D. Elpert who wrote that legislation that renewed the tax checkoff, the breast cancer tax checkoff, and transferred it to the California Breast Cancer Research Program. And then the details are in the testimony, but there have been various legislators who have authored every 5 years a new bill to reauthorize the program. Last year, or the year previous, we realized that, so the minimum contribution, as was explained, starts at 250,000, but goes up every year. We are, certainly as of 2 years ago, we had the highest minimum of any of the tax checkoffs. And we were in danger of not being able to meet that minimum.
And what did you raise last year in the tax checkoff?
About 400,000.
Well, you have, as of October 28th, 2015, according to our records, you have $673,703.24 in the bank available to spend. So if you only raised $400,000, how come you have so much money in the bank?
Two major reasons. So one is there's another piece in that timeline that we're subject to, which is that we have to wait for appropriation of the legislature. So we can't spend the funds once they're in our account. We have to wait then till the legislature says, okay, University of California, you may spend this much of your tax checkoff fund. So that's one issue. The second is that we are funding research grants. Research grants are usually multi-year. We only pay out the money once a year, and we require the investigators to give us yearly progress reports. And then we give them their second year's money and their third year's money. So some of that balance it's in the bank account. It's actually a fourth.
But some of it's
to two.
encumbered.
It's all encumbered.
It's all encumbered?
So every penny of it is encumbered.
But Doctor, it's not our money. I mean, the taxpayers have just designated it, and we're just a trustee.
Yeah.
So why does the legislature have to vote?
We gotta fix that.
What, it's not our money, we're just being a conduit.
Yeah, that's the problem in this. What you're facing here, getting to the chase, one, if you're only getting the number every once a year, it seems to me that if you've got this unbelievable backlog, and what's cool about this money, unlike some of the other money, is it really is unencumbered. It's your group of experts can really make determinations without limitations or restrictions. If you got National Institute of Health money or some other money, you've got all these restrictions. This is a pot of money the taxpayers said, go work on this. You've cobbled together this great group of experts. They then can determine, oh my God, on this list, we think this type of work is the most important, and get the money to them quickly. But even though you've put out all your money or encumbered it all, you have, it seems, two gigantic roadblocks. One, the flow of funds is slow in the first instance because you're only getting it reported once a year. $100,000 to some research group might mean a lot of money if you had it in the first quarter of a given year, or by April when the taxpayers are paying, right? People are paying early because they want the refunds, and so some people with the refunds generally.
Right.
And the second, then you have to wait another year for the appropriations. This is this note like we have here for the YMCA, where it takes 807 days to get the money out to a group. You've got the same problem. So the key here, it seems, is creating, expedite the money to you as quickly as possible by reporting and eliminating the appropriation process. But at the same time, the challenge you have here in the real world, I think, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is government's always worried about a scandal or a problem or a something. And so they need somebody else to approve the process. They need all these various people along the way. Because once, even though it's trust money, and you're exactly right, this money it's the taxpayers say, I want it for this purpose. It's trust money. It is, I think you're correct, fiduciary obligation. But it's hybrid money, because anytime the government touches money, government imposes their conservative views about, I want to make sure there's no problem here so I don't get my tuchus in a sling. That's a defined term in the Yiddish dictionary. Krasson got that. So what would you do, given your experience here, how would you, on the one hand, give yourself the greatest amount of flexibility and get the money to you as quickly as possible? On the other hand, administer this in a way that reflects the conservative nature and concern about government that something could go wrong, right? You guys can go and have a friend, you can give money to somebody, there could be a problem, boom, there's a scandal. How do you fix that? What would you do, given your experience in this? I
think in our case, this is a little bit less of a problem. So we get an appropriation, we get an appropriation for the tax checkoff funds, we get an appropriation for the tobacco tax. We know when the governor's budget comes out in January what the number is likely to be. I don't think I've ever seen the number change between January and the passage of the budget. So we plan.
I'm sorry, I just have to jump in. Why is it even in the budget? It's not our money, this is just an administrative function. Why?
It's different, the tobacco tax is different. The
We're
tobacco
talking
tax
about
we
the
should
tobacco tax.
appropriate.
You're not talking.
But this is taxpayer money,
I'm-
directly allocated.
I'm focused on the
He's right.
checkoff. That shouldn't be in our
No,
state
should
budget.
be in the budget.
So what, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was just saying, so if you want to just send it directly to us, we can spend it very fast.
Absolutely, but it's your money. I decided I want you to have $10.
Yes,
It's your money.
yes. So even though there is an appropriation, we know before well before it's appropriated that it's coming. We expect it, and we plan for it. So we're ready to spend it once it's appropriated.
Can I just say, because we're dealing a little free fall here, this is Assembly Bill 2127 that was Matthew's measure. This deals with asthma. And the reason that answers that question is it's our mistake, because what it says in section 18883 of the, what code is this? I can't see. Rev and Tax Code, it says all monies transferred to the Asthma and Lung Disease Research Fund upon appropriation by the legislature should be allocated as follows. So we put in the appropriation process, which is dumber than a box of rocks. I think we got to change that. I think you're exactly right. Go ahead. That's why it's there.
So then, it begs the question, is this program worth it? Or do you still want to be a checkoff candidate?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's made some kind of
We're able, so
improvement in your,
we would be calling researchers and saying, I'm sorry, we can't fund your grant more often if we didn't have the tax checkoff money. It allows us to make 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 less of those rejection calls and turn those into acceptance calls. Good news, we're going to be able to fund your grant, start work.
therefore you put up with this bureaucracy that just sort of is no-go, slow-go. You don't have to answer it.
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry, we took so much time. Any other thoughts?
I think, so I just, to us, there are 2 burdens in this process. So the appropriations process that you're talking about really happens without us having to do anything. It just happens. So for that reason, it's rather painless for us. What is painful are the 2 things: the continually increasing minimum. So we're in danger of falling off the tax form, even though we are one of the, I would say, most, we're one of the highest accruing funds. We do good work with the money. We get the money out the door. But we're just, in every other fund, we're 20 years old. The other
20
funds.
years times and things, you're probably at 400 and some thousand instead of 250.
Right.
Right?
Right, yes, our maximum is almost 400,000 now, so that's in your materials too, a graph of how our minimum. So I understand the wanting a minimum so that you don't clutter the tax form with a lot of
Okay.
things that aren't
What's your
getting
next step?
donations. Just keep it at 250.
Okay, what's the next one?
The
it
next
250,
one
250
is
then?
the every 5-year renewal. Again, I understand oversight, but as far as I can tell, the legislature has never failed to reauthorize a tax checkoff program that is keeping its minimum. So if you never say no, that's perhaps not the way to evaluate these programs.
But-
So I'd much rather do a
excuse me, Doctor.
500-word thing, because we have to go find a legislator who wants to, I mean, it's an easy bill for them.
But those are logical suggestions.
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
Okay, Heidi, Fireman's Fund.
Hi.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. name's actually Hetty Jalon, and I'm the. That's okay. I'm used to it. I'm the executive director of the California Fire Foundation. We're a statewide nonprofit 501c3 organization tasked with overseeing and maintaining the California Firefighters Memorial Fund, which is financed through the state's voluntary tax checkoff program. Our mission is to provide financial and emotional assistance to families of fallen firefighters, firefighters themselves, and the communities they protect. The fund was actually established in 1994, and today the fund finances the maintenance and repair of the California Firefighters Memorial at Capitol Park, as well as specific programs aiding the surviving families of fallen firefighters. So as everybody knows, we're here to talk about the donations received through the tax checkoff, and how we utilize those donations to support its stated mission, as well as the administrative process of tracking money in the fund. Pursuant to the statute and subsequent renewal measures, the California Firefighters Memorial Fund's tax checkoff dollars can be spent in 3 defined areas, essentially. Repair and maintenance of the California Firefighters Memorial. So the California Firefighters Memorial, as I mentioned, is located in Capitol Park in Sacramento. It's a lasting tribute for the men and women who have given their lives to help protect their fellow Californians. The memorial consists of a unique and stunning polished limestone wall containing the names of every firefighter who's died in the line of duty since California became a state. We're almost at around 1,300 names to date. The memorial wall, if some of you may have seen, it's flanked by bronze statues of firefighter turnouts, the protective garments worn by firefighters in action. There's another bronze statue, Fallen Brother, which sits directly adjacent to the wall, depicting an anguished firefighter removing a lifeless colleague from the flames. Another statue holding the line as part of the memorial site honors the profession of firefighting. It depicts firefighters working a hose line. So the memorial was unveiled in 2002, but since then it's required and continues to require ongoing maintenance, repair, which is financed through the fund. In the statement, you'll see we say no taxpayer dollars are used for the memorial's upkeep and repair, the only self-sustaining memorial in Capitol Park. It should say only voluntary taxpayer dollars are used to fund the upkeep and repair, and had been used for the construction. Regrettably, each year we, on average, actually add between 15 and 20 names to the wall, and we will soon be running out of room on the wall, and we'll eventually need additional modifications to appropriately honor our fallen heroes. Ceremonies and survivor assistance, that's another category. As directed in the statute, California Firefighters Memorial Fund proceeds finance services designed to help surviving families and colleagues heal after heartbreaking tragedy. Proceeds have been used to conduct the California Firefighters Annual Memorial Ceremony, bringing together families, firefighters, citizens in tribute to these fallen heroes. Funds are also directed to specific assistance for survivors to aid in their healing at the local level throughout the state. The Survivor Benefits Guide is another category. Since its establishment, the fund has also financed the creation and updating of a guide for family members of fallen firefighters. And this guide provides them a critical resource, letting them know what benefits they're eligible for. This guide is updated frequently. It's available both in print and online, and is utilized in both medium. And I also provided 2 charts breaking out how the funds have been spent over the past 5 years. And you'll note that obviously no administrative expenses exception of the admin fees from FTB already taken out once we receive the net amount is used. So the foundation, we account for every dollar that comes in through the fund, and it's allocated to its specified purpose, specified in the authorizing legislation. We've actually utilized more than $170,000 from other funding sources just to be able to provide the services mentioned here today. So you'll see we demonstrate to you that indeed every penny is used. And so we have shown you the expenditures from those programs and services over the last couple of years to show you that those expenses actually exceed the revenue that comes
So
in.
what happens now, given the fact that you get a notice once a year from the controller's office, right? Or what agency, let me see, what agency do you work with for this, or does it go directly to you? What is it?
It goes directly to the foundation.
It goes directly to the foundation. So this is
Right,
one
yeah.
where Mr. Goldberg talked about notifying an agency. Instead of notifying an agency, in this context, he's notifying when he sends his notice out to the California Fire Foundation,
Yes, directly to us.
directly to you. So in this instance, it's not a government agency. There's a couple of examples. And so now you get the notice that there's X number of dollars in the account. You must immediately go and just make the request.
We receive, I'm told from our finance department, we receive a check in July. I think FTB said they send the money
The total
in
amount
June.
minus their $6,000.
Exactly. So we get a check in July, and because we're constantly utilizing and because we're constantly these services are constantly in use, we're constantly paying bills and have constant stream of expenses,
just
so
real
we can
quickly,
immediately pay
Does
it off.
the controller's office take an administrative fee at all for handling this? No. So the controller doesn't charge anything. Round numbers, the FTB takes $6,000. The Franchise Tax Board, about round numbers, $6,000 out of this. You get a check once a year. My question to you is, in terms of operating your organization, would it be better if you could make requests more than once a year? Or does it not
Sure.
make a difference?
More money more often is always good. And more money is always
That's
good.
the old adage of, don't ever answer a question unless you know what the answer is. Of course, I knew the answer to that question. Okay, good.
Yes, it would be.
Well, that's great. And you take no administrative fees, and the University of California, you take no administrative fees out of any of this either. All the money that the good news that we want to report of this is we have examples of certain dollar checkoffs where outside of the 6,000 round number dollars that the Franchise Tax Board takes to administer your account, that literally all the dollars that taxpayers, I want to report this fairly, all the dollars the taxpayers in certain instances go directly for those purposes.
Correct.
Okay.
No, yeah, we don't
Okay,
use the money
good.
for
Any further, you
administration,
wanna go to the
for
next panel?
advertise, it goes directly to the programs
That's very good.
indicated in the legislation.
So,
And I did just want to make a note, we're exempt from the minimum. So if
Why?
you look at the numbers, you can.
Why?
It's in the statute.
Really?
It's written into the legislation, and each,
so-
and I'll,
So what's the point of having a minimum?
There isn't. Look, you're not a legislator long enough to not know how to write all these things. Everybody writes it their way. The key is that we can, at the committee, set up some processes and try to get some conformity of this, that we result in this, but clearly, people always write themselves out. Look what we're doing
How many
on,
more, how many more don't have
I
the
don't know.
200?
You know?
I believe the Peace Officers Fund, and there should be one other. And we just extended our sunset.
Is placement
so-
on the form important at all? Like if you're the first one listed on the
I
ballot?
would
it'll-
say
Yes,
yes, and I would
yes.
think you'd probably agree. That's actually, I did want to comment on FTV's
Yeah,
note
the
about
three,
the-
Senator Morlock, as of this writing, the three checkoff systems don't have a minimum contribution, Mary just informed me, are the California Firefighters Memorial Fund Foundation, the California Peace Officer Memorial Fund Foundation, and the California Senior Special Fund. That funds the senior legislature? Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
certainly, okay. Anything further?
So then, maybe
Good.
if Ms. Hall is still here, what is the placement decision on which cause is listed first, second, third, fourth? Is there a process? Yes.
It's just in order of when they're
Adopted?
adopted.
Unless, of
But when
course,
you-
somebody legislatively writes, like we often do, I need to be placed number one. A smart legislator can do that.
Well, part
And
of the
of course,
problem,
make it
you
the
know,
Senator
she-
Morlock, introduced by Senator Morlock, and require that to be printed on the form too. You could do that too. So,
I'm a
Um,
charity.
She mentioned 90% of the filings are electronic now, so part of our challenge is getting in touch with TurboTax Intuit and trying to get an equitable way of promoting the funds, because we haven't been able to see, when I go through the exercise myself, it's just a kind of random selection of which funds pop up. They have like 3 that come up, and then you can click to see the others.
oh, really? It's not like
So-
the form?
No.
Probably not.
Well, we could legislate that.
No, you
Oh, I'd love
Sure you
that.
couldn't. Not with TurboTax, you couldn't.
Why not? Yeah, if you want to do TurboTax in California, you have to display all of them in the order displayed in the form. I would think that would constitutionally pass. I wouldn't do it, but I think you could. If you're
We're on
listening,
board with that.
lobbyists for TurboTax.
You got Lacert, you got all kinds of tax companies.
Well, you don't have to, you don't name them, you just indicate that if you're going to do this electronically, it has to properly, appropriately reflect the form that all other taxpayers who would file on paper would reflect, end of issue. Otherwise, you're not authorized to do business in California.
But if you're doing taxes electronically and you're looking at what people are actually doing and no one is actually doing it that much, then
It's okay.
why putz with it?
We're okay.
Okay.
Anything further, because I want to move on to the next panel.
Sorry.
Well, I just
My
wanted to, point out that we are dedicated to transparency and accountability, and I think that's part of the reason for our success and how we're able to attribute those dollars as they're intended. Our audited statements are online. The last couple of years, we post our annual report online each year. And
That's not a bad
there's
idea.
an annual independent audit ensuring the foundation's in compliance with state and federal laws and USGAAP in terms of administering a variety of restricted and unrestricted funds and maintaining our integrity.
What do you think about this idea? It relates to your recipients. You know, that's a really good idea. What if we said, I'm just thinking about, I don't know how you do it, but like if you really want to fix this process and clean it up, what's the problem you're trying to solve? You're trying to get the money to the organizations as much as possible, as quickly as possible to every organization, so you're adhering to the wishes of the taxpayer. That's what you're trying to do. And I think, completely agree, it's trust money. That being said, if you created something where you required the agency, if they didn't have unspent funds, that they had to indicate that why they weren't and what was going on in a few words. But then in addition, and I ask you this with respect to the breast cancer issue, that if you did what the firefighters do, and you just said, okay, if you're a recipient of these funds, you're required to post online what you did with them in some way. In other words, to give a light of transparency, to give people in government who have a legitimate concern about being in trouble because the money was inappropriately spent. Someone could lie about it, of course, but at least, again, transparency. Would that be much of a burden to the folks you give money to, that if you receive funds, they have to be designated as taxpayer checkoff funds, and taxpayer checkoff funds have to be disclosed online of what you did with them? If it's general first or whatever, just some disclosure to put more pressure on the system to make sure that we as fiduciaries are making sure that the money goes for the intended purpose, not just quickly, but that it actually achieves its objective. Would you think that would be something that would be, just in your judgment with all your experience in working with all these different agencies, something that the folks that you give money to would have a problem with?
So I was a little unclear on what you were suggesting. So we post we do so I want to reiterate what you said. We also agree, believe in the transparency and accountability. There is nothing about our legislation that says we have to say which grant tax checkoff money went to as opposed to tobacco tax money, but we do, because we think it makes sense and it's an incentive to people to say this is the grant that your tax dollars, your tax checkoff contribution went to. Here's a description of the grant. We post on our website then the progress reports as they come in. We have
Yeah,
a description of here's the progress, and then if there are publications that come out of the research, which there usually are.
Yeah.
Those are then posted on our website. So requiring the recipient agency.
Yeah, no, I think just having you do it's
Yeah,
fine.
I mean, so
Yeah.
having us do it makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. We also tell the investigators, so we make it kind of a special award. You got chosen as a tax checkoff recipient award. We've had events where we've made them parade in front of people and say, you know, this is what your money's paying for. It just makes sense. I think treating these as you would treat someone handing you a check and saying, I need to tell you where this money's going to go, and I need to tell you what I'm doing with it. It's
So
that's
you
the way
already
we
do it
should be
just
treating
voluntarily
these.
as a best practice. The question is, would it be much of a burden with respect to each of these agencies in a few words to indicate what they did with the money so that we can show that, and if people want to look it up or click on a website to see if they're making a contribution, it could actually highlight really smart stuff that people are doing. I think the balance is, again, transparency, but not too much of a burden, and if the agency did it, maybe that works. Okay. Anything further before we move to the next panel? Okay. Thank you so much. Excellent. Thanks for the good work. Appreciate it. Okay, panel 3. Current challenges administering funds, Department of Public Health. We have Alan Lum, Deputy Director of the Administrative Division of Department of Public Health, and Greg Oliva, Assistant Deputy Director for the Center of Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, and also from Department of Education, Monique Ramos, Director of Governmental Affairs Divisions, and Benito Delgado Olson. Unfortunately, I spoke to him earlier, spoke with Miriam, and he got ill, and he couldn't be here, but we talked to him and wished him our best. So, Monique, you're going to have a little bit more responsibility, but understand we have his testimony. Okay, let's start with Department of Public Health. Alan?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Oliva first.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you, Alan.
And so the issue here, as we look at this is one where we had some challenges. If you can talk to him. Go ahead. You can start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, member and staff. Greg Oliva, Assistant Deputy Director, Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, California Department of Public Health.
Yeah, this is just so the folks that are listening know, this is the Asthma and Lung Disease Research Fund, which was reverted back to the general fund, and the California colorectal, how do you pronounce it? Colorectal, I can never pronounce that. I never want to know anything about it. Cancer Prevention Fund, both of which you were administering, both of which taxpayers put money into. The 3-year donations, $658,000 of taxpayers' money in the asthma group and the colorectal, $237,000, and it went back to the general fund, and we want to know what happened and why.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to come and share some information with you today. We do have historical information on both of those funds. In looking at the obstacles, which was one of the missions of the hearing in the notes, the primary obstacle, the main obstacle, was, as you were likely aware, in 2007 the Department of Health Services was split into a Department of Healthcare Services and a Department of Public Health. And those actual two funds never came to the Department of Public Health as transfers of administering those programs or any budgetary appropriation expenditure authority to distribute the funds.
Well, so what are the, I know this is before your time, Mr. Goldberg, but did you look at this at all with respect to these two funds? Somehow the Franchise Tax Board collected the money, it notified the Controller's Office prior to your time, and then somebody in the Controller's Office had to tell you guys, and what you're saying is you never received notice from the Controller's Office because of the split?
Mr. Chair, Alan Lum, yes, the colorectal fund, the administrating agency is Franchise Tax Board and not the Department of Public Health, while the Asthma and Lung Disease Fund was identified as the Department of Healthcare Services. So we would not have received any information from the Controller's Office.
Did you take a look at this, Mr. Goldberg, at all?
Mr. Chairman, I was told we did notify the Department of Health Services, who was in charge of administering that fund several years ago, but I'll certainly follow up.
Okay, we'll follow, our staff, we'll follow up too, to double check it, to figure out what happened. But basically what you're saying is, and we'll find out where the truth is, don't worry about that, but you're saying you never got notice. And in one instance, in the other instance, it's the Franchise Tax Board that's administering agency. Ms. Hall, do you have any knowledge of that? No, that's not correct. It's not correct? No, we don't administer any of the funds. That's right. What do we show on our grid? Miriam, what do we show? We have Department of Public Health for the Alzheimer's Disease Fund, and for the other one, the colorectal, it's called California. It's the expired one, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, hold on. We'll take a look at them. But go ahead. Please.
So as I'd stated, we do have a little bit of historical information as it relates to the funds that were dispersed for asthma. The Asthma and Lung Fund was essentially a pass-through to the American Lung Association, and there were $553,000 that went to the American Lung Association, and that our records had showed that the funds that reverted to the general fund in 2013 were $278,000.
Is that in the asthma fund? I have the colorectal fund as 235 in unspent funds. These are expired tax checkoff with unspent funds going to the Department of Public Health as the managing agency.
We have the same figure of $235,000 for the colorectal as well. I was providing the Asthma and Lung Disease Research Fund,
Yeah, I know
which
that.
also reverted.
And you say, yeah, but we have the Asthma and Lung Disease Research Fund on our records from our research as expired, but it was zero balance here. Oh, because it already reverted, I see. And I see, these have already reverted, and the ones, and do we know how much reverted to the general fund at asthma? Maybe what we should do, to be fair to the people and honorable to the fiduciaries, is, since the money went in the general fund, to have a conversation with budget chairs. 238,000 went, have a conversation with the budget chair and have this money go to fund. Asked if they'll make an appropriation out of the general fund, because it was basically gifted money, and have those money go to some organizations, whichever appropriate, that deal with lung disease. Maybe it is the American Lung Association, I don't really care, but let's be fair to the taxpayers who wrote the check, so maybe we want to talk about that. I don't know if we can get support to it. To the individual taxpayer?
Yeah.
I think the administrative costs would be pretty heavy.
I
You know.
know that.
We take seriously you're mentioning, Mr. Chair, about inspiring confidence at the outset of the hearing, and there actually is some good news that comes from the Department of Public Health. And if you look behind me, the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis balance of $66,000, we proactively reached out to the Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis Association, told them about their remaining balance. They made a formal request, which was a process that Mr. Lum created after the split of the departments. They made the request. We sent the request to the controller's office. The check was cut, and we just learned this week that they received the check for $66,000.
So this Lou Gehrig's disease money did go to them ultimately?
Yes.
So this 66, it will go with them this week. I mean, this will be done. So that's off the list. That's good.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Okay.
The other good news that we have is and I'm glad you've mentioned Alzheimer's on several occasions during the course of the hearing. We administer the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Fund, and we've been doing so since 1985 as Department of Health Services and now Department of Public Health. And we've awarded approximately $21 million in research grants to 117 different awardees during that time. So we've demonstrated capacity to distribute the funds. That in the actual statute and revenue and taxation code requires for a programmatic effort to develop a process to award contracts and grants to researchers to address the care, the treatment, and
So
cure.
your answer to your question about the Asthma and Lung Disease Fund of the $238,000 that reverted, you're saying that happened because of an administrative problem from your point of view because of the splitting of responsibilities and naming of departments, as it was in the legislation. It was a mistake in that process somehow. Right? It was that, it wasn't anything further than that. It was just a mistake that got caught up. I mean, these things happen. It is what it is. It's not, so that's, it's not something where we can learn a great lesson. It was just a mistake that was made. Assuming you're right on what you say, we'll follow up to further investigate it to make sure, we have to verify it. But that being said, that was the problem. Now, with respect,
Yes.
with the colorectal cancer prevention fund, why did that revert? That's $237,000 that was reverted, and what happened there? And that was supposed to go to who? Let's see.
That was essentially the same reason of the lack of authority regarding the
Department of
transition
Public
of the
Health.
departments. Yes.
Okay. Okay, we'll verify that. Anything further on those, you think, sir? Go ahead.
Well, I made a little joke about returning the money, but having been a partner of a CPA firm, and I specialized in doing nonprofit audits like Habitat for Humanity and a lot of major nonprofits in Orange County. And I'm sort of at least well-versed in restricted gifts. You call it trust because you're an attorney.
Restricted
and so
gifts.
it's sort of like for you, it was like a prepayment, but you couldn't take it until you had provided services. With a restricted gift, you have to use the money according to the wishes of the donor,
That's right.
period.
Right.
And if you don't, you either contact the donor and say, hey, we can't do what you wanted to do. Would you like to do something different with it? You don't unilaterally take it and give it to someone else. That's,
Yeah, you either have to use it for a specific purpose, or you have to get authority.
you return
like
it.
you would do, for example, at a community college. If you gave a gift to a community college. you get
regardless
this-
of how expensive
Right.
it may be, it's not
That's
your
the law.
money.
Right.
And so the state is sort of guilty of taking funds from taxpayers and misapplying them.
Right.
That's.
And we have two examples of that, and I think that the most effective way to solve that problem, the administrative nightmare, even though you know who gave it, you know what year, and the heartache, and the overhead, the greatest way to get the greatest money to the organizations for their intended purpose is for us just simply to own up to it in the legislature and the governor, and to simply write checks to organizations that we need to write, $658,000 check and a $237,000 check to organizations that the taxpayers intended, which would have otherwise gotten their money under the law, and then we've held true to what we said we were gonna do. A little bit later, maybe put some interest to it, but that's what we need to do on those two ones, because it fell through the cracks, because they were restricted funds. That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
100%.
serious issue. So I may have joked about it because it's going to take you a lot of time and effort to give a $3 gift back to somebody, but that's the legal approach.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to Monique Ramos, the Director of Government Affairs for California Department of Education. Let's talk about, which of the fund we have to talk about there? I'm sorry, I apologize. This is the K through Tate College, a nonprofit addressing unmet material needs. This one for homeless and impoverished children? Thank you. Is that the one?
She's going to talk about the YMCA fund.
Oh, the YMCA fund? Okay.
Okay. So good
Please.
afternoon, Monique Ramos on behalf of the Department of Education. So just because you do have the we are on your chart, I want to clarify that the last tranche of money we received this budget year, I believe is now in the controller system as of sometime this week to get a warrant out. It's within the regular processing. So that has been communicated to YMCA. That fund with this payment should be liquidated. So it should be tapped out.
But is this accurate in the sense that how you say it should be tapped out? You're still got to go through this budget process. You're tapping it out and you're getting it done. But are we wrong in our analysis here?
So the YMCA is no longer on the tax checkoff form because it did not reach the threshold. So we received the last pot of money, basically in this budget, and that money has just been allocated. But your timing in the sense of having to go through this, yes, that is correct. I mean, it does make an assumption that agencies actually get the money out by September 1st, which sometimes
They don't.
They don't.
So the
because
bottom line is it could be more than 807
it could
days.
be a few more days.
Oy
Could be.
vey, smear, don't tell me that. It's 807 days I was kaplatzing.
But I want to clarify that money is out. It's gone. It's being paid and it's closed out. So moving on to the
Well,
California.
let me ask
Sure.
the pointed question. Is it being closed out because the article and because the effort of us to start looking at it, and you moved fast because you had to get it done? If that's the truth, it's the truth. Because it could have been more if the light was not shined on this. That's why we want to fix the process. This doesn't
Sure.
happen again.
So the article was actually about the California Youth Leadership Fund, which I was about to dive into.
Okay.
The YMCA fund, that was just the scheduling of it getting out. So like I said, it was an additional $30,000 approximately that was appropriated to us this budget year, and that's what got out. So that fund is shut down because it did not reach the 250 threshold. Okay, so moving on to the California Youth Leadership Fund. So we received notification in summer of 2013 from the Comptroller's Office, essentially, that there was now, that this fund was on the tax checkoff form, and I'm sorry, it was the Franchise Tax Board, not the Comptroller's Office, which was sooner than we had anticipated as an agency. When this bill was moving through the process, we were told it would be several years out. What we went ahead and did is submitted a budget change proposal at that time. So our budget change proposal was for more than was in the fund. The fund at the time we received notice in the summer was at about $51,000. Our budget change proposal was for $77,000 in state operations and $250,000 in basically grants to go out. So the Department of Education is at an interesting point. We are 80% funded by federal dollars or by special funds, which means we have only 20% flexible dollars to essentially fulfill a program like this. The department has had some struggles with, frankly, trying to meet the goals of the legislature and the goals of this superintendent with that very limited flexible dollars. So for the past 5 years, we have basically put cost estimates on pretty much every single bill moving through the process because we need those dollars in order to implement that piece of legislation. As this bill was laid out, we estimated that to be about $77,000 for the run of the program. We went ahead and went with the $250 because our goal was that we would do this BCP and then we wouldn't have to revisit the issue at the next year's budget subcommittee, that it would kind of become a process where it just continues to roll. So from what I can tell that happened on the department's end is there was new staffing. I was new that year to budget for the department. There was a new committee consultant for the sub 2 committee in assembly education, and Senate sub 1 didn't frankly have a stable staffer that year, and it fell through the cracks. It was not the only thing to fall through the cracks. There were a few other things not related to tax checkoffs that did fall through the cracks that year. I was able to go back and kind of retrace the steps from the article, and what appears to have happened is either a misquote was given or misinformation or something happened. The information officer who worked at the department that provided that quote has retired, and I've not been able to confirm, but I did talk to our chief operating officer who handles the books, and she called Department of Finance, and it was very clear that that money has not been swept into the general fund. I spoke to Finance on Thursday. They do not plan on sweeping that money into the general fund, and we've committed to Finance to submit a new BCP for these dollars. It is a late BCP, but we will still submit it, and they are aware that we will be submitting it. So the problem that we continue to have with this, though, is that there is an approximate amount, from what I was told by Finance on Thursday, $93,000, but so it's an approximate amount. That's not a lot of money to create a state task force, basically go out for applications, review those applications, and then get scholarships out. An assumption, I think, was made that this program would be more profitable than it has ended up being. So now we're in a situation where, frankly, we don't have enough money, and the department's not interested in basically taking it all for overhead. We're not interested in just creating overhead or grants for the sake of it. So what I think we will be doing is submitting a budget change proposal that will propose spending the money probably more directly on scholarships. We're going to go ahead and look at what the bill laid out. It talked about disadvantaged students. It talked about foster youth. It talked about low-income students, and figure out if there are entities that we can basically act as a pass-through to give these dollars to nonprofits to provide civic-type scholarships, to bring them up to lobby, to work on civic engagement. So it does not meet what the law specifically laid out, but at least it reaches the spirit of the law. We would propose that to go through the budget to avoid going through this timeline again and getting the money out next budget year.
And how do we determine on this, whether it's a appropriation, is it just in statute, Ma'am, or a budget proposal, or an appropriation in this context? Can you just tell us in the language on this legislation how that worked? Because, I mean, the BCP process or the whole budget proposal process is something where it would be great if you could still get the money out in an appropriate way. Like, for example, the UCs, I mean, for the breast cancer, whether it's an appropriation or a budget item, I mean, why do we need to go through that whole process, going to your point? Any thoughts on that, in terms of how the legislation operates?
The statutes are written that way, and we can change it so that the statutes no longer require an appropriation by the legislature, if you'd like to speed up the process. That is something that we have control over and not the departments. They get the bill language as it is, and they have to go through the process.
Okay. That's what I thought too. Okay.
So the budget change proposal would kind of be, it's not quite a budget change proposal. We're gonna hopefully work with our friends at finance. And we would make a change in trailer bill to kind of align the actual code section to align with the budget action. So we've reached out to finance and let them know that's our plan.
You have any questions, Mr. Senator?
I just want to kind of repeat what I heard, because we were trying to figure out what, franchise tax board doesn't charge anything, or 6,000, excuse me, and then the state controller doesn't charge anything. But you're saying for this particular program, 70,000 internally in costs, and you raised 120, 200,000, 250?
We raised, I think the number I got from finance last week was about 93,000 approximately.
So we made 23 net.
So, and that's our point. It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense to basically pay for the state administration part, but that means we can't meet the spirit, we can't meet what the law requires.
Okay, so.
So we're gonna propose basically a change within the budget process to change the law to send the grants out directly.
Yeah.
And I think if we are just a pass-through, we can avoid the overhead situation. It's when we need to hire staff to write a grant proposal, to review a grant proposal, to monitor the grant proposal, that is when we get into a situation where we don't have the resources to just absorb it.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, it kind of begs the question, why do we do these things for transferring money to state departments? Why aren't we going directly to nonprofits, the habitats, the memorials? It's just a trust fund, and why? I appreciate you're taking the time to do this, but obviously there's lots of room for improvement, and maybe instead of discontinuing the program, you say, okay, let's just focus on where we can quickly, with technology, with our digital age, we can get checks to these nonprofits within minutes of
Right.
receiving the funds, because this is not a difficult issue. That someone's designated a gift, honor it, get it over with. And
Well, but not all of these things there's competition often among nonprofits. And so one group says, well, we want it versus that one, and you need an arbiter. So okay, we want to do a breast cancer, but is there one group? Is it appropriate for the state to just designate somebody? Now, certainly there's political power where certain things happen for certain people have political power, whatever it may be. But I think the big picture is this, in terms of where we're getting to that was revealed by this. During this year, we talked a lot about these various tax credits and other stuff. We figured, how do we get a standard? Senator Leno tried to do it, and it was sidestepped. Certainly, any new legislator can write anything the way they want to write it if they're crafty enough to figure out ways to do what they want to do for the interests they're trying to achieve, the objectives, public policy objectives they're trying to achieve. But at least for our contribution as a committee, it seems that this larger think, as we now can look at an event horizon of 33 years of these tax checkoffs, $102 million in 51 funds. This hearing process and the endeavors that Miriam has gone through, that really I think, certainly Senator Walk did this when she chaired this committee and tried to do it in an administrative way. But I think I certainly have come up with a number of suggestions I've learned as a result of the very good testimony here of things that we can do to improve the process that aren't really expensive. So maybe in situations where you're only going to get $250,000, there's not going to be all these other processes. We're going to have to streamline that in terms of money going directly out, limiting the overhead, doing things, figuring out what those standards are that haven't been really revealed in a comprehensive view that we've engaged at the staff level and now at this hearing level from what we've seen, to figure out how to avoid mistakes, how to get money to folks quicker. I mean, basically, in a nutshell. Anything further? Because I just kind of wanted to, please go ahead. I want to summarize what I think we got out of this.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is we've become a United Way function. You know, it's just like your paycheck check off, but it's run amok. And if you have the ability to work with our software people, the TurboTax, et cetera, you can say, you know, if you have a qualifying nonprofit, you know, fill in the blank, they have an audited financial statement that we can have online, and they qualify to be there, you give them a code number, and instead of a long list, you just go to a schedule that says, here's the code number for qualifying nonprofits, and if you want to give a gift to them through your tax return, put in the amount, put in the code number, done, and within hours, the
They got the money.
controller can send the check or wire the money, and if that's the service you want to do, and then we don't have all these special kicks and all these, you know, program of the day and the minimums and all the rest, just get out of that business.
Maybe so.
Thank you, this is fun. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Any public comment? Any thoughts?
Sure, yeah, so, my
One,
name's
one, you got to get a microphone, because they got to get you on this, because there's thousands of people around the globe watching this.
Maybe your mother.
Take the maybe off.
So I'm Michael Flood. I'm the CEO of the LA Regional Food Bank.
Yes.
And so when you see the Emergency Food for Families Fund here, that is a fund that our food bank and the food banks in Orange County and other food banks around the state benefit from. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how it works, I think for us it works very well. Our fund was established in 1998.
Yeah.
So taxpayers have donated over $5 million to
Oh,
this
wow.
fund since that time.
Fantastic. And you got $359,000 in the bank as of October 28th. That's great.
Right. So to the other presenter's point, our fund goes from the controller's office to the Department of Social Services, which then just quickly allocates those funds to the food banks they're already working with
And
through the
what's
Emergency
quickly?
Food
What's
Assistance
quickly?
Program. Well, quickly would be following this timeline in terms of June 15th, the funds come in, and DSS, I don't know when DSS gets that letter, probably a couple of months later, and then they let food banks know what our allocation is. Keep in mind the way DSS runs their program, they just don't send us a check. They tell us, again, it goes to the point of how the legislation is crafted. These funds are for purchasing food, and to ensure that the state knows the funds were used, we send the state a reimbursement of what we've purchased, invoices in essence,
Yeah.
and then we get the check after that.
And how long does that take?
It's pretty quick. CDSS does
30
a good job.
30 days,
It can
60
take
days?
45 days after we submit.
Yeah, but you're only giving them. Wouldn't it be better for you, because people are hungry all year round, right? I mean, self-evident. But wouldn't it be better for you if you could, like, once a month, got a notice? If you get checks for $10,000 and $20,000, that's a lot of folks you can feed.
It does. I think one thing that I don't know this, but I think would be interesting is I'm guessing most of the receipts are coming in the spring during the deadline. I realize there are receipts throughout the year, but I'm guessing the reason why this has been set up is the bulk of what's coming into these funds is being received by Franchise Tax Board by April and May, and which is part of the reason why I think this has been set up in that fashion. It's not like they're getting the same amount of donations all year long. It's tied to the tax form.
But Ms. Hall, is that true? Do you have some way we can look at when the flow of funds come in? There must be funds throughout the year, right? So you grab a mic, yeah, please. I think it's important, because this goes to this issue that I think is important of especially because electronically you can do it, you should always know what the balances are, and the controller's office should not be limited to these once-a-year notifications.
Yeah, there's two dates, April 15th, and there's October 15th. That's extended due date. So those are the time periods. But we would be able to get your office, we know the monthly contributions for each fund, and we could give you that information and come up with the percentages. But I believe this gentleman's correct that the majority comes in by April 15th.
And how many food banks, Mr. Flood, do you participate in this program around California?
Roughly 50. You know, there are 58 counties, and some counties have more than one food bank. Some food banks
Combined.
cover more than one county
Right.
in the rural areas. So roughly, it's about 50 that these funds flow
And you guys
to.
get together periodically?
Yeah, through our state association,
Yeah.
our California
And are you,
Association of Food Banks.
generally, are you happy with how this program's working? Are there any other improvements you would make? 'Cause you do such an
Yes, I
important
think
function.
some of the suggestions that have been made here, I think are good. I do think minimums need to be kept, because otherwise I think the tax form is going to get too long. I
Yeah.
think it really should be, you know, if this thing becomes 3 pages long with all these different funds, honestly, I think it's going to be utilized less. I think
Yeah.
the way it works right now makes a lot of sense. I understand exemptions certainly come into play for the 2 or 3 funds that come in. I certainly would be supportive of that. But in general,
Yeah.
I think actually having minimums and having to prove yourself that there's enough support among taxpayers to support whatever your fund
But
is
what about
important.
what about not without these escalator clauses? Because certainly with respect to the breast cancer folks, a 250 is a good number, you know. But this escalator, because they were formed a number of years, 20-some years ago, they're now subject to this gigantic minimum. Where if we would reauthorize them at 250, they wouldn't have this situation.
Right.
What's your thought on that?
We are also subject to the escalator clause, so
You
it's
were
an
formed
issue.
what year?
1998, but
So
we've
you
been
probably had 325,000.
We're in the 300s,
Yeah.
350 or something
Yeah.
to that extent. So I think that should be looked at, you know, to be somewhat consistent
Okay.
across the board. But I think that the issue around minimums, whether it's 250, 300, or 3, and when you think about it, if you are, and food banks attempt to publicize the fact that this is on the tax form, and we have seen our numbers increase because of just trying to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, through flyers and that type of thing, let people know. So to a certain degree, you know, a small escalation makes sense because hopefully you're performing well and people are responding. And to that issue of cause du jour, maybe, you know, in 5 years, it's not as burning. I mean, we feel fortunate that people feel committed to the hunger issue, and that goes all the way back to 98. But, you know, again, I think there's also this balance of not having the form too long.
Yeah.
So we're overwhelming people.
Right. Okay, good. Any others on public comment? If I can just briefly, and I'll let you close, Senator Morlock, but what I wrote down here in terms of trying to capture the essence of what we talked about here today, and I think most everyone got the notes, but this whole notion of the Franchise Tax Board transferring once a year certainly needs to be looked at, because there could be circumstances where those dollars could be used, and it doesn't seem like it's going to burden the system. Should I probably take my mic, Dana? Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. That it wouldn't burden the system too great because of technological ability to do the bookkeeping today is much different than we had in the Stone Age. Secondly, with respect to the Controller's Office, more frequent transfers to the administrating agency, you know, I guess that's really kind of the same thing. It's the flip side of the other coin, where FTB and the Controller's Office are working together. Maybe we want to look at, I personally don't want to burden the Controller's Office because I don't think it's necessary, but a follow-up or responsibility by the Controller's Office once they put this information out. I don't know if that's really their proper role. I think it's going to require more budgets and this and that's and a lot of heartache, and you're not going to get it funded, and that there's other ways through the internet that you can do that beyond just the simply monthly reminder. It doesn't seem to me it's too burdensome, and it's going to require a bunch of people and processes. And the claims schedule, you know, okay, we got that. They ask them to write the controller write a check. Okay, if untouched for 4 years, the Department of Finance reverts, it seems that there should probably be some direction that it's not just a reversion to the general fund, but that it's an appropriation to the purpose for which these unrestricted funds were given. If in fact there's been no ask by the department, then maybe there's some level of causal and connectivity. If, say, for example, you hadn't made the applications for feeding people, then we'll give it to a number of organizations or something for that purpose so that you meet that underlying fiduciary obligation. 5, the idea of possibly requiring each agency, each of these 18 agencies that are required, not 18, there's actually, since 3 of them are going directly to foundations, only 15 of them that are on the form, to have maybe limit a very short statement at the end of the year why those funds haven't been spent. Because it's not appropriate to just simply point a finger in someone's eye if, in fact, like with the cancer research folks, the breast cancer research folks, it looks like there's a big fund balance, but the truth of the matter is those funds are encumbered because they're multi-year grants. So it's not at all. It just looks that way because the money's in the bank, and it's easy enough to explain, and everybody gets it. Next, the next is the idea of appropriating these funds is somewhat duplicative, right? Because it delays the process dramatically. And the question is, if in fact these are directed dollars, that maybe, you don't need to go through the process. Certainly as a legislator and protecting the legislative prerogative, we need to examine that. But certainly that's one of the big delay factors in this whole process that gums up the work. We looked at this idea of the automatic minimum increase. We should at least look at that. Clearly there's an issue about too many of these things on there. It diminishes the value of all of them. There has to be some indicator. I ran into that with the state bar trying to get something for funding legal aid. And there's a real sensitivity among all the various groups about too many things being on. But we need to look at it, maybe the idea of when and how the escalators work, the idea of the 5-year automatic renewal. We should probably just look at that. It needs a little bit of homework to analyze it. If they're automatically always done, do you need to do it? Maybe not. Maybe the fact that they're on there because they're making their minimums, do we need to go back? We certainly have legislatively, from a jurisprudential standpoint, the whole larger issue about oversight and sunset provisions, but I think we need to look at that. We should be sensitive to the administrative fees, like the firefighters and the breast cancer folks. There's no administrative cost. We have a basic cost at FTB, no costs at the state controller's office, but then this issue about the agencies, if in fact we're dealing with small dollars and they're loading it with so much of a cost, clearly are we really achieving the objectives that we need to achieve? Next, recipient post online of what they did with the money. I don't think it's the recipient. I think it maybe is, like we mentioned with the breast cancer, that the agency that gets the money, here's what we got, here's how we distributed it, these are the various groups that got the money, so it's very clear as to what you did with the money. So if someone wanted to ask the question or investigate that organization, we had that level of light shined on it from the government perspective. And then this idea of appropriating reverted funds from the general funds to the proper organization, the restricted gifts, maybe that we need to go back, at least with these two organizations that we found, and hold good with the taxpayers who wrote those checks, and give it, and talk to the budget committee and to the appropriation committees of both houses and see if they'd be willing to appropriate those dollars to those organizations, so we've made good on our promise, because it's not really our money, it's restricted gift money that these voters, that these taxpayers gave. And again, the agency overhead may be, in fact, that if we're going to design these programs, we have to design them where they're really low or no overhead grants, so the most amount of dollars go as quickly as possible to the folks that the people that wrote a checkoff system with. So from the testimony here, I don't know if anybody has, any of the witnesses that are still here have any thoughts of things that I missed or you want to add to it as we move forward. And of course, we're going to check you guys out to double check you to make sure you're telling the truth. And if you're not, we got ways of dealing with that. But we've got to make sure that we respect the legislative process in that regard. We can, and we've done a little bit of homework, but I want to go back and drill down on it to make sure we feel good about it. Sir, and then other thoughts I'd just like to hear from the witnesses. Is there anything else we missed? Because what we're trying to do with this hearing is to try to figure out what the stuff we walk away from here, what our deliverables are. So do we do legislation? Talk to some other committee chairs at the Budgets and Appropriations, leadership in both houses, and try to figure out an appropriate way to go forward and make this work. Any other follow-up from the FTB or the Controller's Office you deem appropriate? We're open ears. Sir.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for hosting this hearing. I think it's always healthy to step back and look at what you're doing, and is it the best way to do it? And so in that vein, I don't know if we are poking a finger in someone's eye or if we're beating up on government. We do know that government has no competition, so we're, like the nonprofits here, they got to run lean and mean, and so sometimes as government we should be looking at our brethren in the nonprofit sector who are trying to raise every penny they can to do what they're doing. But when one department fails and it makes it to the paper, it reflects on all departments, and that's the problem. And so as a legislator, we've got to see what can we do to improve what we do so that we don't get embarrassing articles and cause taxpayers to say, okay, if they're screwing up there, then where else are they screwing up? And we don't need that from a marketing standpoint. And Mr. Chair, when I was a supervisor, I was always very careful to let managers manage. I let my department heads run their departments. But if our internal audit department or our performance audit department or a reporter came in and found something that was inappropriate or inefficient or, you know, grossly out of whack, and we had to deal with it. We've had this discussion before, whether it's Caltrans or whoever it might be. We need to tell and show the taxpayers we're running the most efficient and appropriate departments as possible. So hopefully that isn't being misperceived. We're not here to do the gotcha game. We're here to say, you know, this is an honest catch by someone in the journalistic industry, and now we're trying to see what we can do to improve things, because I'm still new and I'm having trouble figuring out who runs Sacramento. And so if it takes legislative fixes, then I'm happy to do that. So I want to thank you for the process. I also just want to say one thing that we haven't looked at, and maybe if I were to give you point 13, and that is just my fear of picking winners and losers. It's just like who gets to be the 20 that are approved for the tax form, or should we look at a policy of no better, no worse? If you're a qualified nonprofit and you have minimums in here, if you have contributions of so much per year and you have an audited financial statement and a working board, then maybe just like anyone that qualifies through United Way, you ought to be eligible for my being able to allocate a part of my refund to your nonprofit if we're going to get into this United Way model. And that's something that, maybe it's for a bigger discussion at a later time, but that would be something I think that needs to be reviewed. So thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you, Senator. And any of the witnesses have any other thoughts that we could have otherwise missed, or anything else that sparked your attention, so we can try to, really be as thoughtful as we can be? Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, I think on point 11, in particular with the asthma and lung, I don't think there's legally I'm not sure if there's an issue of going back and getting that money that reverted to the general fund, because it had been distributed to the Lung Association. For the colorectal fund, there's language within the statute that described a process.
That's right.
So determining the readiness of a potential awardee or applicant for the funds. So there's not really a specific entity called out in the statute. So, getting that check back to the appropriate entity might be more challenging.
Okay.
I just wanted to
We'll look
acknowledge
at
that.
it. We'll look at it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sloan.
Mr. Chair, Senator Morlock, Allen Lum. For the future, any future bills, since each bill is unique, the department is available for any technical assistance that may help the author to ensure that the department has the capacity to ensure that the dollars get out.
Yeah. I think, look, there's a balance here, because there are organizations that are more important to the public or have more political power or whatever. I think what we try to do as a committee, as a value add, is to add some intellectual framework, to add some experience. This clearly started. People added on later. I don't think somebody sat down and thought through how this thing works. Clearly, this circumstance which we've now seen has shed light on it over the years, and so our job, it seems to me, is to sit back and I don't think we're going to be able to stop these folks in the future from coming up with funds on these kinds of things. But what we can do is provide some guidance as a result of our experience and insight into how to do this and try to correct what went before. And certainly Senator Leno elegantly did this with respect to tax expenditures. And, in our committee this year, one of the biggest challenges we faced was that everybody wanted the tax expenditures and didn't go through the analysis that Senator Leno did so painstakingly. And so we've got to figure that out. But this is a good first step, I think, of identifying what happened, why, what those best practices are, what we can learn from them, and how to and how to improve the process. Madam Chief of Staff, do you have anything else that I missed here? Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Meredith?
Mr. Chair, I would
Yes.
think that the word you were looking for is template.
Template.
That we have a template
that's
for
what-
all
that's
these
the word I'm
bills
looking
in the
for. Thank you.
future, and we just have a regimen that they go through that we cover everything. So great
Excellent.
job.
Very good. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.